So good morning, you're very welcome here to the home of James and his wife for our Q&A session as part of this fantastic half marathon this weekend. You're very welcome. A lot of people come from far and wide today to run tomorrow and also to spectate and get some information from our Q&A session. So I'm hoping today we're going to be able to get some quality information from you, from this fantastic panel here. And I'm hoping everybody can take something away today they can use maybe in their coaching, as maybe a coach of athletes, or also as an athlete if you're currently running. So there's lots of information we're going to hopefully cover today. And we will also open the floor to questions as well. So if you've got something you want to add to the questions, or something you've come with, maybe a question that you have for this panel. It's not often you get a panel like this in Northern Ireland to talk to you about the sport of running. So I'm just going to introduce you to our panel today. So we have Katrina McKiernan, London Marathon winner and 4-time cross-country world cross-country medalist. Katrina is here. Yes. Give a round of applause. No introduction needed for Joe Pavey, 5-time Olympian and European champion on the track as well. European cross-country champion from GB, Gemma Steele. With Bjorn Corman, he's a 2:10 marathon runner and training partner to Eli Kipchoge. With Jackie Newton, head of coaching and development at GB Athletics. Blue. And also Mo Ali, he's a Dutch international, and he paced Yellowloff last year at at Lauren, and he also is training partner for Sir Mo Farah. So we'll do the autographs later. Yeah. Some people are a bit starstruck already. I did this the first time. I was like, really? So we have 1 hour for this first session. I've got some areas to cover. So I'm going to kick off some questions for our panel. I'm just going to choose different people who I think are most appropriate to answer these questions. Also, I see that a lot of people have been studying the audience profile today, and we have some fantastic people in the audience coaching at all different levels in Northern Ireland. So we're keen to hear from people coaching not only elite athletes, but also coaching those who are beginners and people at different levels in Northern Ireland. So we're going to start off today with the topic of training and periodization. And this is something that everybody is interested in. And for coaches who come out of the Level 2 coaching course and they're thrown in front of a lot of athletes, it's the first thing that you would sometimes think, what am I doing here now? So I just want to ask the first sort of question. So splitting your training week, and we're going to deal with this in a few different ways. So let's start with Mo Ali. So splitting your training week into the different types of training. So you've worked with Mo Farah, or Sir Mo Farah as well, as he told me last week. Just give us a little guide of your training week and how you would split the training up.
Training week will be like the 7-day cycle, and we're going to include there long runs, tempos, and track sessions. Those are main 3, and in between we take the easy 12-mile easy long runners. But long run, when we say long run in a marathon, it will be like 20 mile in Sundays, and Monday easy around 12 mile, maybe 5 mile in the evening. Tuesday tempos, and then you have like 2 easy days, and then you have the track session. So tempo, track session, and long runs, and between you have also gym sessions.
Okay, so in terms of the differing the marathon, half marathon to your cross-country training, just give me a sort of guide of the differences in training there, and obviously the mileage is slightly different and things like that. So how many hard sessions are per week would you normally run?
Normally, when you're training for track and when you're training for marathon, it's slightly different. Marathon, you put a lot of mileage and less aggressive trainings, but more slower pace. And at the track, you always like going harder, and Often you go in two times a week track session, so it's a bit different in terms of speed and long runs. You have more mileage in the marathon and less mileage in the track, but more speedy workouts.
Okay, so I'm just going to pass the microphone to Gemma Steele. So we're talking about pre-competition, advice on tapering for races. So obviously you have a good experience on the track and the cross country.
Yeah.
Yourself and Joe and Katrina. So just give me a little guide of when you're taping for a half marathon or marathon. And just obviously you obviously have you came 7th in the world half marathon championships. So obviously you're right up there when you're there. So let's give it a guide of how does your final weeks before the race pan out there.
I'll just start reducing the mileage quite gradually. Probably I still keep the long run in because I like to keep a bit of the training in my legs. Obviously, I don't like to taper down too much too early because I get a bit lazy otherwise. I feel a bit lethargic. So I try not to taper down too much too early, and then just to keep the speed in my legs. I'll try and do more speedier reps rather than longer reps. So I'm not tiring my legs out as much. I'll be doing
Can I just drill that down? So obviously if you're doing your full mileage, how many weeks before do you start to taper down, and what, like with your 100% of your mileage is 80 miles, how many weeks down before do you start to taper, and how far do you drop in mileage?
Probably to about 70% of what I do. If I'm probably doing 90 miles a week, I'll probably do more like 70 leading up to half marathon the week prior to the week before the race. So just gradually drop it down, and then I'll do like some 200 metre reps a few days before, well not a few days, 4 or 5 days before the race, and some 200s rather than some longer reps, which seems to help me to keep that speed in my legs without tiring them out too much. But I do tend to not go too mad on the tapering down because I'm one of those that benefits more from not tapering as much, but everyone's different obviously. So it's everyone's.
So are you saying
individually.
2 weeks before the race you only start taper? 2 weeks before the race?
Yeah.
So and Joe, how does that differ to you?
I think it's right what Gemma said. You don't want to feel lethargic on race day, and I think it really depends on the event. When we're talking about marathon, I think you want to have done your longest long run at least 3 weeks before and then start tapering down. But in the last sort of week to 10 days, I'd still want to do something that's, say, 90 minutes long or anything. But then when I compare tapers to the track, it's kind of different because I think once you get to that championship race, you've already really tapered your mileage right down in the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks, and you're focusing on everything is about getting those track sessions right, and the runs in between don't become important like they would for a marathon. I think taper is so different compared to what event you're doing, and I remember when I'm getting ready for championships, I'm thinking about the runs in between mustn't interfere with those really key track sessions. But I'd still probably include things that were kind of tempo based. Like I might still include a good sort of 15 to 20 minute tempo within the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks, but really just doing easy running between the track sessions. And then I would often say if I was say if it was like I was racing on the Saturday, I might want to do a session on the Tuesday, which is kind of just 2 key efforts. Sometimes I would just do like 2 times a mile, but I'd really hit them almost like it was a double ease down. So I'd ease down to hit those 2 sort of mile reps, and then it would almost be like I'd be treating that as a race. So I'd be really fresh for that, get really good quality out myself, and then I would do some strides, sometimes the day before the race. If it was the day before the race, I'd do some really short strides, but often I'd do it the day before that and do some longer strides just to keep myself ticking over, but really tapering the thing right down. But I think with a marathon, you're still wanting to keep the long run in there, sort of week to 10 days, but only say 90 minutes. And then with the track sessions for the track championships, you're thinking about keeping the key sessions there, keeping yourself sharp, not being lethargic, but focusing on quality. Whereas sort of further back away from the championships, you're doing those track sessions, but your legs are slightly tireder and the quality isn't quite there. So it's sort of changing that focus within the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks. Found really, really important. And you might want to put a key race in there that's your final race before your championship race, and that can be important as well.
So some key points there in terms of obviously the quality has to be right. Obviously that last third before your race. Obviously, she was saying obviously the further back at the start of your programme, you're getting the distance in there. But obviously that's a key point today. So the quality has to be right. So are you focusing your sessions or that last 4 to 5 weeks on that race pace that you're going to be feeling on the day? Is that something you're very focused in your mind?
Yeah, definitely race pace, but also I think that's one benefit of being older as I became sort of into my track racing, that the years of experience I was able to use a lot of knowledge I gained. I think as we all gain experience, it wasn't just about race pace, it was knowing that I had to hit key times for key sessions of certain recoveries. So I'd be trying to hit a certain time for like my blocks of 400s of 30 to 40 seconds. I'd be trying to hit my K reps at a certain time if they're off 3 minutes, and another certain time if they were off like a lesser recovery like 90 seconds. And I'd kind of know where I needed to be at and work on getting those specific targets. My husband and I would kind of have like a pace chart, and I'd know I'd need to hit certain key things for certain sessions, and we'd kind of work away at trying to hit those goals. And then through other years I could look back and think, right, I need to be hitting my K reps in that. I mean, yes, you're right, you need to do a lot of race pace work, especially for 10K, but I think a lot of the sessions you're kind of, I mean, I think it's different when you're talking about half marathon, but for 5K, 10K, I think a lot of the sessions you're really aiming for quicker than race pace, because you've got to put it all together without the recovery. So you're kind of setting your parameters, like the K reps slightly quicker than race pace, the 800 slightly quicker than race pace, so that on race day you can comfortably put it all together without stopping. I think as far as marathon, half marathon training, you're looking at those key mile splits, and you're going out doing those longer runs, rehearsing, keeping that race pace going, and getting those sort of, you know, knowledge to yourself about how much you can keep a pace going, so you can make those estimations of what pace to aim for on race day, and that becomes sort of more of a key part of it, I think, as well.
It's very good advice. So, what's your Katrina?
Yes.
Overtraining is a big thing that I'm always looking at. Overtraining. I'm feeling tired, and I'm not. As Joe said there, when you go back and look at what you did the year before, you can judge where you are against that, and that's a very good thing. Obviously, as you get older as well, you need more rest. But overtraining. So how do you know when you're overtraining, and what do you do to back it off, or to adapt to when you are feeling tired? I mean, people always say to me, on a Tuesday night I do 5 by 2 mile reps. But sometimes on a Tuesday, you've had a hard day doing something work maybe you're not able to do. So athletes understand you can actually change the. It's alright to change the day, or if you need an extra day's rest. So at your sort of level, and how do you approach the training week when obviously you're doing other things as well as your running training? You know, in terms of your rest and overtraining, how do you manage all that?
Yeah, so I suppose when I was training, I trained under the heart rate all the time, and it's a great indication of how you're coping with the training. And if your heart rate, like, to keep it very simple, I had 3 different zones that I trained at. So there was the easy pace, then there was the tempo, or threshold as some people call it, and then we had the speed, like on the really fast stuff on the track. So the most important heart rate for me was the easy, so that on the days that I was meant to run easy, I ran easy, so that I was recovered to be able to run fast on the days that I was supposed to run fast. And that's a big mistake that a lot of athletes make, that they never run easy enough, and therefore they're never able to run fast enough, and therefore they don't get the progression that they should. So I don't know any other way of doing it other than heart rate training and getting tested on the treadmill and finding out what your heart rate zones are.
Give me a guide just for some people in the room here. Obviously, heart rates vary by person to person, but what would be your top heart rate in the easy zone?
Yeah, so my heart rate, and everybody's very different, so just don't write this down and go by these heart rates, because that won't work for you. That's why you need to get tested on the treadmill to find out what heart rate zones you work at. And so the resting heart, that's important. So every morning I would have taken my pulse to find out what my resting heart rate was. And when I was at my peak fitness, it was 36, 37. So if it was up, it meant that I needed to pull back a little bit on the training. And I loved to run, I loved to train, I loved to race, I loved to get the progression. And I didn't want to get training interrupted. And maybe the odd time it might have been up a couple of beats. And my coach, Joe Doonan, when he'd meet me for training, it wasn't hello, how are you? He'd just say pulse. So that was his greeting to me. So, you know, if it was 36, I would say it was 36. But if it was 38 or 39, I might say it's 37. So that I didn't want to get the training interrupted. But, you know, if it went up, like, you know, 4 or 5 beats you can play around with. But certainly if it was up 6 or 7 beats, it meant that I was overtraining and that we needed to cut back on the training that particular day. Maybe just maybe have a couple of less reps, or maybe run them at a slightly slower pace. And it's a great indication, the heart rate is a great indication if there's, you know, if you're overtraining, or maybe if there's a flu or some sort of a bug coming on. So the question was, what was the different zone? So my easy running was at 135 heart rate, anything from 130 to 135. So my long run would have been done at that heart rate, and the other runs, like the in-between runs as we call them, the easy runs in between, would have been at that heart rate. Then the threshold run was at 160, 165, or the tempo run was at that pace. And then the track was anything above that 165 to 172. And that was, you know, if I was at 172 heart rate, I was on my ear. But it's you know, I believe it's the best way to train. And for my marathon training, you know, in the build up to the marathon, the big block of training, the threshold run was at 160, 165, and the easy runs then and the long run was at 130, 135. But in the last 3 weeks before marathon, then it was all at marathon pace. So we would have found out from the heart rate what pace I was going to be running at, what pace I was going to run the marathon at. So all of the training, there was, you know, before that, I would have been going at 160, 165 heart rate, as I said, but I would have never gone over that then in the last 3 weeks before marathon training, if you understand what I was saying. All my runs would have been at marathon pace, all my hard runs as such were at marathon pace, so that again I was recovering. So nothing was very, very hard, but previous to that, in the months building up to that, I was going above marathon pace. So I hope I made that clear. On people
last 5 weeks, if you run the marathon or any of those distances.
Well, no, the last 3 weeks. Yeah, all your hard running, or for me anyway, the last 3 weeks, all my sessions as such were at marathon pace. So that would mean the hour tempo was at marathon pace. The long intervals I was doing was at marathon pace. But in the other weeks before that, they were at above marathon pace. So therefore then, I was getting, the body was recovering, was resting, but also getting familiar with what marathon pace was like, ingraining it into the muscle memory, so that, that I was very familiar with it on race day.
Thank you very much. So Jackie, I'm just going to ask you a little bit in terms of the training programs, in terms of what would be the typical training. So you're head of coaching development at GB Athletics, very important job. GB have done very well at the World Championships. So what is the sort of average length of program sort of for elite athlete these days? Obviously it depends on the person's age and their experience, but what would you sort of say to the people in the audience today would be a good training program length time?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, well, I think long-term athlete development is really important. So So for the past couple of years, I've been working on the development programs for coaches that are working with athletes right the way across the pathway from grassroots through to high performance. And that's the key philosophy that we're trying to get over is at what age do you want this athlete to be at their peak? And then you work backwards from there. So when you say how long is the program, if we're looking at long-term development, we're looking at, say you've got a 17-year-old athlete that you're coaching in an event that you think they're going to peak at around, 29 maybe, or 32. You're actually working back from that age and thinking about how that progression is going to look. So you've heard from the athletes today about the training they're doing and the mileage that they're doing. So as a coach, you would think to yourself, right, well, when they get to their peak, how many miles a week would they be running? And if that's more than 100 miles a week, well, where are they now? And then thinking about that progression that goes through, because what we find is with some endurance athletes, they hit those high mileages too early and then they've got nowhere to go. So if you're running high mileage in your younger years and you actually want to be in the sport for more than 10 more years, where are you actually going to go and where are you going to take that? So when we look at training programs, we look at a macro cycle, which is, that could be a 4-year program for somebody who's aiming for the Olympics on an Olympic cycle, or it might be a year's program for somebody who's got a target to do the Antrim Coast Half Marathon next year. You might say, right, well, my macro cycle, my long-term program is a year. And then you break that down into blocks. And it was interesting before hearing about what you put into your week. And I know you were going to come on to periodisation anyway, but that might change. So in the winter, it might look quite different from the summer, or as you get closer to your competition, it would look different than it was a year out from your competition, the types of sessions that you're putting in there. So I don't know whether that's answered the question, Andrew.
So I think that's something I talk to people on my podcast all the time, is that basically people say, what length should my training programme be? And you heard from Jackie saying there, it could be a year. So if you're got an athlete who is maybe new to a distance, you're not going to be the best in your age group in 16 weeks. You might take a year to develop yourself into that event, that type of event, if you're going from maybe 10k to half marathon. So there's some good advice there. It's not just, I need to run that time in 60 weeks or 10 weeks. You have to take time to develop yourself into the new event that you're going to. I'm going to move to altitude. Obviously, some people in the audience will be interested in altitude, but I'll just not spend too much time on that. But I want to ask Bjorn a question just on altitude training. Obviously, a lot of athletes come from very different backgrounds in the world, and obviously people from Europe are not bored at altitude, and obviously the Africans are. We saw at the World Championships the weekend. Once the races go 5 and 10k, the Africans are prevalent and at the front of the race. Obviously 1500 and 800 metres is slightly going the other way in terms of strength and things like that. And the Europeans are more sort of strong now at the moment. Just give me a guide of you're training with like Joey, who obviously is from that background, an altitude background, but where did you find are the best locations to train, and tell us the sort of benefits and the time scales you need to be there to get those benefits.
Well, I really like to go to St. Moritz, Switzerland. It's on 1800 meters altitude. You definitely need at least 3 weeks. Like the first week, you just have to adapt to the elevation. It's very hard. It's very hard to train. The first 4 or 5 days, you only have to do very, very easy runs, like 1 minute slower than you do on sea level. So you need at least 3 weeks to train there. The benefits, well, for me, it's not important to go on altitude training, but just to go on a training camp. Also in January, February, we go a lot to Portugal. It's just on sea level, but for me, it's very important to train not at my place at home, so I don't feel the stress I have at home. Just go to do the groceries at home, or you see other people going to fix your car, or just small things things you do at home you don't do on training camp, and that's the big benefit for me. So it's not only altitude, but just going for a training camp.
So give me some of the key sessions that Kipchoge likes to run.
I think the best key sessions he does is just the progressive long runs, like 40k, and then on 315 pace, 320 pace, and that on 2,400 meter altitude.
So he's doing those runs where he's upping the pace in certain parts of that run.
Sorry?
Are you talking about a run where he would be changing the pace in the run to?
Yeah, progressive. So they start very slow, the first like 5k, and then building up till 255, 250 pace, and on a very hilly course, and that's quite impressive.
Yeah. How many changes in pace over the run?
I think every K is getting a little bit slower, so it's just progressive. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a session to take some back to some clubs in Northern Ireland instead of your standard tempo run on a Thursday night. Progressive run where you have four zones, so getting quicker every quarter of your run. I'm just going to take one more question just on altitude training. Obviously, European and African runners, obviously a lot of European runners go to altitude training camps to improve their fitness, and obviously Africans are born at altitude. So Mo Farah is a bit of an interesting one. So Mo Farah came over to UK at age 13. I remember him when I was coaching in Hampshire when GB Juniors came down. He was 13, 14 years of age. He was there and I took some sessions with that group with Mike Smith at Southampton, and he would have had no probably experience of altitude training as from where he wasn't born at altitude. But obviously he's then moved away from the British setup, went to Salazar, and a lot of altitude training as he was older. So he's a person who was brought up in Britain and went to altitude and used that. Not like the standard Africans who are born at altitude in Kenya and Ethiopia. So how do you find, Mo, altitude training differs for European and African runners? Obviously, if you go to a training camp at altitude, your African runners are used to it because they're from I-10 or places like that. You bring European runners in. How does the training have to differ to?
And as you said, Africans are born in altitude, and they've been living there in the whole their life. And you just go there to train for the altitude for 3 weeks or more, and it would not be so easy like them, because every time you go, altitude is not something that you can learn and then you will be professional. But every time you come down to Europe and then go back, it will be a new thing. So you have to still do the efforts. But as Björn told us, it's not only about the altitude, it's also about learning the culture of running in Africa, and learning how they run, learning how they have a good discipline for running, how they run as groups and help each other. And plus altitude, which is bonus, which makes you fit. I don't know scientifically how it works, but it helps you a lot to get fit and be in a good shape.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're just going to move on to racing. Obviously, training and racing is very different, and I'd like to ask Gemma Steele a question just regarding in terms of when you change into the racing part of the season. Obviously, a lot of people are obviously doing the cross country in the winter to build endurance for the track events in the spring. Just give me a little guide how your thought process in terms of the training of the winter compared to the spring. In terms of, are you always going to pick an event that you want to target each year, or I suppose a lot of younger athletes and so in their teens they want to do all the cross country in the winter, they want to do all the track indoors, and they want to do all the track outdoors, and a break between your whole year. So I suppose just give us a guide of how do you see that training periodization, sort of, how do you focus for the training year?
Yeah, I suppose my season's a bit different to everyone else's, focusing on the cross-country season, and I suppose the summer season's my sort of time to sort of taper off a bit and not have a break, but ease back from the more serious races. So Yeah, I focus more on the autumn season, going through to the winter, and I think that's when my sessions I've sort of put more into the sessions and focus more on that sort of time of the year, really. So
are you trying to focus on a series of races per year, or are you one of those athletes who have one goal to get that medal in a major championship, or how do you?
I think I just make it up, really. I go from race. I love racing, so I use my races as my tempo runs as well. So I just love to race myself fit. I do target races, probably a series race once a month, and have that. But mostly use other races as sort of tempo runs, really, and work it that way because I just enjoy racing that much, and I find I get the benefits more from the racing than I would training. Week in, week out without a race, so I'm one of those that just loves to race all year round, basically. But I do focus more on in the winter, autumn, winter, and summer seasons more so it's different for me. So
in terms of Joe, you obviously you touched there on key sessions that you know, the sort of sessions that you do to focus that test how ready you are for certain type of races. So obviously Northern Ireland is very, very popular here for 10k. There's a lot of 10k. Because in Northern Ireland, you can run 2 a week here in the spring, summer, and autumn. Just give me when you're racing some of your key sessions for 10k. People love to have something to take away, to try something new at their club. When they what are the key sessions you like to focus on when you're running 10k?
Yeah, firstly, I was just thinking about what you're saying about periodisation and things like that. And an interesting thing I found earlier in my career, that I was having this shift from doing loads of mileage to thinking, right, okay, it's April, May time, let's panic to get that track speed back. And I'd end up getting injured. And later in my career, I feel like I was able to be more consistent by thinking, okay, it is the winter, I do want to put in more mileage to get ready for the track season, but I also need to keep some of that track speed there, that track adaptation, because then your body's already adapted. I see a lot of athletes put in these hard winters and then suddenly think, right, let's panic, I want to get ready to race, whichever time of year their race is. They suddenly start putting the quicker race shoes on, whether that's flats or spikes, and suddenly doing all this quality work that they're not used to, and there isn't really the time to adapt sensibly. So with my sessions, I would kind of keep key sessions in throughout the year, but do them in a probably less quality way, but I'd still keep them in there so that when I then wanted to transition to be in sort of summer race shape, I wasn't trying to play catch up with like the adaptation in my calf muscles and Achilles and everything that in previous years would be just getting too sore and then I'd get injured, and it was really frustrating. So I'd always keep an element of quality work in there a lot more. I suppose there were certain key sessions I like doing. Some of them I wouldn't say were the high volume ones, because in a way the high volume ones for 10k, like 10 times a k on the track, things like that would be more like get through them, shorter recovery, thinking of doing race pace. I think I was more focused on ones I'd really look out for were the shorter volume ones, maybe like 5 or 6 times a k off 3 minutes, and I knew I need to get them all in a certain time, and I'd have, because the 3 minute recovery was quite long, I'd be really like zoned into like really trying to hit each one, whereas when you've got only a minute recovery, you're kind of more going through the motions. So I do that one. I also had a session that I used to do quite regularly, quite close to the championships, but I'm talking more like 10 days out, where I do 1,000, 800, 600, 400, but each one I had to really hit it. So they had to be like, I suppose I'd have times that I had to hit, but it was more like I knew what I had to hit rather than it being related to actual race pace. But it was like each rep was really full on. And then I'd do that in spikes, and then I would put my racing flats back on, or even some quite cushioned trainers. Then I'd do 6 times 3 minutes unmeasured off a minute, just to practice that grueling sort of carrying on pushing myself while I was already exhausted from what I'd just done, but the injury risk would be lowered because I'd now have my cushioned trainers on, and it used to feel really hard because I was so spent because I'd done the other ones at my maximum effort. And then I'd put my spikes back on and then just do 2 times 200, so that I would finish without just slogging, because the 6 times 3 minutes I was just really like slogging them really. I also used to do 16 400s where I do a block of 8 off 35 seconds, then have a 5-minute rest, then do another block of 8. But again, I knew what I had to do the first set in, which I'd do in flats. I'd do the second set in spikes, and I'd know what I want to do them in. And sometimes that was, in some ways, quite low volume. So sometimes I'd have a recovery and put my, more cushioned shoes on and do a tempo effort of, say, 10 minutes just to make sure I'd done a bit more volume, but I wouldn't be measuring that. So I'd have things like that and mile reps and things like that. But I suppose they were kind of the key ones I'd look out for, but a lot of the times I'd do things where I'd come down a distance. I was never a fan of going, I know some athletes find this useful, I never used to like going up the pyramid and then down again, because I felt like that was quite an injury risk. I start off with short reps and sprint them like mad and then do longer things, because I knew that endurance was so key. I'd rather start with longer stuff, get that important, grueling stuff done, and then the speed is like the icing on the cake, rather than just sprinting and longer. So I tend to do a lot of sessions where I'd start with long stuff and come down, and quality gets faster and faster, things like that. And yeah, a lot of tempo runs and that. I think a lot of my career, probably like Katrina, we didn't have this GPS technology during our career, so it was more difficult, wasn't it, to say, right, I'm going to run this many miles at this pace. Like, I was interested hearing you talking about heart rates and that, because that was kind of our main feedback for some of the longer stuff, whereas nowadays I know people more easily can go out and say, right, I'm going to do 10 miles at this mile pace, but I found that difficult. I used to, on a longer run, look at my key longer runs for longer races as being, right, I'm going to keep my heart rate at that pace, and that was my measurement for that. But otherwise, I'd be looking at my times on the track, really.
Thank you. So I think we're seeing a big word come out of that is consistency. When you're running your reps, are you holding the times? So often you see athletes start well and then it all goes south. And whatever reps you're doing is the consistency, and obviously you're trying to keep hold of those times as you progress each session, so that you know you're in shape. But if your time or athletes' times are dropping in those sessions, you're starting too quickly. Isn't that what we're going to get consistency? Katrina, just I want to ask a question, obviously, on the cross-country side of things. Obviously, you've been at the top of cross-country a lot of times at the Worlds. Cross-country season is upon us, and we're now in Northern Ireland. We're 7 weeks from next week to the championships, our first cross-country race. What should coaches be focusing on now for that period in? For athletes, a lot of people here are coaching athletes of all different abilities. What would your advice to them be in terms of get right the next 7 weeks? What sort of work would you be suggesting to do?
So what's happening in the next 7 weeks?
So we have Northern Ireland Championships, our first cross-country race of the season, the league in Northern Ireland in 7 weeks. So a lot of people here are coaching athletes in Northern Ireland, of maybe children or maybe adults.
Juniors or
both. We've got people here from all different clubs. How would you structure this next 7 weeks?
Right, and I'm asking you questions now, but what does the Northern Ireland Championships, what does that lead on to?
Also, we have the first race is the Bobby Ray, which is the Bellini playing field. It's the first league for all our athletes and our seniors, and it's the children's championship. So you have adults in the first race of the cross-country season. It's the 7 weeks.
Yeah, no, but I suppose what I'm trying to say is, what is our main goal in the cross-country season? Because the cross-country doesn't, well, now it finishes.
So it's getting ready for that first race. Getting ready for that first race to run.
Right, so, and what distance is the race, like, out of these things? But I just don't want to be throwing stuff out there.
Let's go 4K, 5K women, 10K men. Let's look at that.
All right, yeah. So look, if they're, and yeah, so look, cross country is a little bit different in the sense that you don't have as much speed. But I suppose to give you some idea of the training that I used to do for World Cross Country and European Championships, the World Cross Country wasn't until the end of March, so my training didn't really start until mid-September or that, so I would have run on the track. But the kind of training that you need to do, again, look, at most training schedules are, nothing is cast in stone and there's no magic. And at the end of the day, if you're a runner, you need to run laps and need to be able to, I suppose, run as much as you can get away with. And everybody's different. Some people can take on more of a workload than others. But again, everybody needs to do a long run. And if your race is, for the men it's 10k, so, they're going to be doing at least 90 minutes of a long run. But I don't think you really need to do too much over that. Maybe an hour and 45 or so. Then I used to do hill reps. So that was on a 3-minute loop, and I would start on the flat, and then I'd go up a hill, then I'd go down a hill, I'd run on the flat, then I'd go climb again, down a hill and finish on the flat. So it kind of replicated a cross-country route, and you were kind of, it was at a steady pace, but you were changing pace all the time as well, because you were going up and down. And I think that was one of the key sessions for me, because cross-country courses, they're all up and down, so you need to get the body used to and get the body to adapt to that sort of terrain. And I would do 6 to 8 reps of that, depending on how close I was to championships. Then I would do, again, our threshold run. I think a tempo run or threshold run is the bread and butter of any weekly training session. And that has to be, regardless if you're running track, if you're running cross country, if you're running indoors, a tempo run is something that needs to be done. Even for club runners, sometimes they shy away from them because they're not easy. You don't get any recovery in between. It's a continuous, sustained effort. But certainly it's an important part of any training session. And then just short hill reps as well, like maybe get a nice 80-metre incline and do some maybe 6 to 8 hill sprints up the hill, and even practicing running downhill fast. That's a practice in itself as well. Sometimes people just run fast uphill and do some hill sprints, but if you can allow yourself to fall down the hill as well, you can. Again, some people are good at running uphill and some people are good at running downhill, but you can train the body to do anything. And so, and then the rest of the sessions are just filler-ins. But variety that's what I found with cross-country. There was always variety. No day was the same. And, just
Thank you very much.
do your best.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask Jackie a question. Jackie put together some fantastic sessions for the juvenile athletes when she was at Athletics and I want to ask a question just for coaches out there. What percentage of your running should be on grass? I mean, some of the clubs here have some fantastic facilities at their disposal. I know obviously Leeds and Ballygenier have the Billy Neal playing fields where there's 2 or 3k manicured course all year round. People ask me all the time, if I sacrifice my long run on the road for a run on grass, well, I can't get on as fast there, so maybe not getting as much training. But I don't see it that way. Like, there are a lot of athletes a lot of time on the grass. What percentage would you see the GB? I mean, GB did very well at the European Championships last December. I've done well the last 2 or 3 times, right the way through from the under 20s, 23s, and seniors. What percentage of the time do those athletes spend running on grass?
Well, it really does depend on the environment that the athlete's training in, actually, and what you've got access to. Personally, when I was running myself, I did as much as I possibly could off-road on the grass or on trails, and then getting ready for a marathon, I would then start to move onto the road, just to make sure that I could cope with it and I was familiar with it and I could take the impact. I can tell you about Kieran McGeehan, because she now lives where I'm from, in Stockport. She trains with the New Balance group out there, and they do the vast majority of their training off-road. So they've got a disused railway track, which is gravel, and it goes for miles. So she'll do her tempo runs and her progression runs on that. We call it the Middlewood Way in Stockport. So, I know that she likes to do as much as she possibly can off-road, and then obviously her key sessions are on the track. And that's the surface she's racing on, so she is getting her body ready to race on the correct surface. So I suppose if I was to sum it up in a nutshell, personally, I'd say because the grass and the softer ground, there's less impact. It saves your legs that way a little bit, and it's traffic free as well. So some of your longer runs, if you can get off road and you've got access to those areas, that it's a good thing to do. But The big but is you have to be familiar with the surface that you're going to race on, because it's a little bit like putting the spikes on. You don't want to suddenly put in your speed work, and you don't suddenly want to turn up on the start line of the race on the road. 5 miles down the road, you're hurting because your body isn't conditioned to be able to take the impact that the road gives you. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. So obviously getting familiar with the surface you're running on. People who did a lot of miles on the road, when you come to cross-country season, it's all on the grass. I think something that you said was very good, Katrina, as well, is obviously people forget in the cross-country it's undulation, up and down. We're all very good on the 5k on the flat. Once you hit that first cross-country race, the undulations there, and that's where most people start to find the difficulties. So if your training program for the next 7 weeks, find those undulating types of terrains where you can train your athletes, and that will condition them correctly for the big races coming up.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well, because you were referring to some of those training camps and sessions that we did here. So as like Katrina said, we would practice running uphill, we would practice running downhill, and we would look at the technique. And there is a technique to being able to run well down a hill and run well up a hill. But not only that, we'd run on a camber, we'd do practice running round tight bends and accelerating out of the bends. Anything you can think of that is going to be on your cross-country course, whether it's a hill or it's a tight bend or it's a camber or it's rough ground, it's a bit rutted, just go out there and practice on it, because then you get on the start line of the race and you think, I'm ready for this. There's nothing on this course that I've not practiced for and I've not trained for. So I think that, I know you're going to come on to some psychology, but visualization and just being confident and knowing that you can tackle whatever that race or whatever that course throws at you because you've done it in training. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Something that on my podcast, Sir Mo Farah said, he said, you should always practice the race before you go to a race. Your first 10k, you should have run 10k fast on a training run before you've actually taken on a 10k. You don't want to fish. You don't want to go there and say, oh, what can I run here? I hope I can run this. He's always ran that in training. So I wanted to just talk to Mo Ali, who spends had a lot of time with Mo. I want to move on to a thing called diet. Just obviously eating, and a lot of people struggle with eating for races. What to eat before races, the day before races, and a lot of people, the timings of eating before races. Obviously, it all depends on the different types of races and distance and terrains. But just give me a guide in your background, Mo, in terms of the diet you're eating, and also what is your meal like on the day of a race?
To be honest, I don't have a meal plan. Just to eat like
McDonald's.
eat health, and like the day before the race, eat more carbs like spaghetti and stuff. But I don't have like I have to eat this, I have to eat that. I don't have a schedule. Just eat health things, and the morning before the race, just coffee and toast would be good. So. Not too complicated, not writing down a lot of things, but then still keep in mind to eat healthy food.
So in terms of Bjorn, you've had to prep with Kipchoge quite a few times and get things right for races. How does Kipchoge, how is his eating pattern waking up this week up to a race?
For me or
Oh, both of you, obviously you're working together, yeah.
A lot of carbs, so especially on race day, white bread with jam or only coffee. We train a lot with Martin, the drinks, also a lot of carbs, so we start drinking it a few days before the race just to get more carbs. But we are also doing that in the weeks before, so like when you have 10 weeks before the marathon, we have 8 weeks with high mileage, like 100, 120 miles a week. Then you have to eat a lot, so in the last 2 weeks you are tapering, so you run less, but you still eat a lot. So especially carbs. That's
so
the most
keeping the
important.
eating up, even though you're tapering down, people think eat less because you're doing less exercise, but you have to build up that energy for the big race.
Yeah.
In terms of Jackie, also the research and development of running, what have you found in terms of eating? Has that been touched on with GB Athletics? Is that a big thing now in the coaching and the sort of manuals and things like that? Is that does that come into it anymore, or?
Yeah, no, it does come into it, and certainly, yeah, you want the athletes to be getting a good balanced diet with carbohydrate, protein. So protein, we know, helps to mend the muscles after they've been damaged after training. So getting some protein in after training, and then replenishing the carbohydrates so that your glycogen stores are full again for the next session, and also, periodizing your eating as well. If you know you've got your key session the following day, you've got a big training day, the day before, a little bit like before racing, you should be putting more fuel in the tank, because you're going to need that fuel for your session. So yeah, there's quite a lot, but I think also when you are training hard and you're training, you're doing a big volume of training, you sometimes you can't eat enough. And you shouldn't shy away. We hear about all these bad foods, about sweets and Mars bars and everything. But actually, when you're training really hard, you can have that stuff. But as long as you're still putting in the nutrients as well, so you are putting in the protein and the right sorts of carbs, and also all those micronutrients, so the veg and the fruit and the seeds and the nuts. But as long as it's not just that, because with big volume, you've got to be getting more and more. I mean, I've been on training camps with Paul Pollock, when he would say himself. So I don't think I'm saying anything that he wouldn't say himself. He has at times not eaten enough, and it's led to injury. And he then got advice from the nutritionist, and the size of the plate of food, you'd be quite shocked. But he has to eat that for the mileage that he's doing. So yeah, there's a lot we do know about eating and about food. Far too much for me to talk about today, but yeah, it's good for people to go away and think about that, and get the right food and the right amounts of food in if you're an endurance athlete.
So some advice there for your athletes as you taper for the marathon, half marathon, your big races. Keep the intensity of eating up, so as you get energy into your body. I'm just going to take one question here on mental preparation, and it's something obviously everybody struggles with mental side of running differently, and some people are naturally more confident than others. What are the things, Gemma, you would do to prepare mentally for a major race? How do you see the last 2 weeks, and how do you get yourself in the right frame of mind for running big races, or are you naturally race ready?
No, I have to motivate myself every day and reinforce my confidence every day. I'm not naturally a confident person, so I have to remind myself of what I've done in training, look back on my training diaries and see the sessions I've done and the hard work I've put in, and visualise what I've done in training, what hard sessions I've got myself through, and then think, well, I've done the hard work, so the race should be the easy part really. And I just have to make mental notes to myself really that I've overcome things in training, so the race should be the easy part. And I'm a very visual person, so I'll visualise the course and things. And if I've done a race before, I'll visualise the course. And I like to. That's why I like to do the same sort of races, and I know the course and I can visualise and plan what I'm going to do and stuff like that really.
I remember in 2015 going over to the Edinburgh cross country with a team from Northern Ireland, and Eamon Martin was there with Team England, and he was basically taking them around the course, and he was getting to visualise. He said to everybody, and I heard him go in a good puddle with his team, look around you here, who's done the training that you've done before getting here? No one should be afraid here. We've all worked as hard as anybody in Britain for this race today. So it's that type of motivation, and mental prep can be being well prepared for races. This is good, because obviously mentally prepared and also physically prepared, planning how you're going to this is going to go, what the course is going to be like. Is your training going on to chances of being right for the type of course you're running on? I just want to sort of throw the end of the session just over to the floor, take some questions. So has anybody any questions for our panel just of this end of this first session?
Just like to ask anyone in the panel just about if you maintaining the threshold. So say a marathon plan, for example, is 60 weeks or something like that, and you did pretty much nothing for the rest of the year. I thought I'll start a 60-week marathon plan. If you didn't want to do that, and if you wanted to maintain a threshold how would you basically measure your fitness to know that you can not have to go the way into it?
Good question. Yes, that's a lot of thing. A lot of people who recreational run all different types of races throughout the year, but they keep it basic fitness, and then obviously adapt to the type of races you're running. Joe, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, I mean, it does depend what level of fitness you're keeping. I think if you're keeping a base there, it's useful if you can keep all the components of training in some way, like a long run. But like you say, you're not ready to run a marathon, so it's not a really long run, but something that's still like, you know, at least sort of 10, 13 or sort of 14, 15 miles if you can. But at least if you, or even just I'd say, for me, I would say I want to maintain doing, say, a 90-minute run each week, but I would want to be that would be maybe just sort of time on feet, and then if I was going towards a marathon, I'll be thinking, right, okay, now I've got to think about what pace I'm doing, thinking about maintaining that marathon pace, things like that. But I think keeping all the components of training in there on a regular basis, and if you're just trying to maintain a basic level, everything you do, you're not doing totally as full on as you're going to be when you enter that 16-week or 12-week plan or whatever, but so you're keeping in an element of tempo running. It could just be sort of a 15-minute tempo run, which will then have to become longer as you get ready for a marathon, maybe keeping some intervals in there, but you're not pushing yourself to the limit, so you're doing, say, 3-minute efforts. You could do, say, 6 to 8 3-minute efforts, but you're not measuring them, but you're turning your legs over quicker, so everything is still in there, and maybe maintaining a bit of core stability, some basic sort of strength and conditioning, but just using your own body weight. Everything is just there, so that when you're thinking of entering your plan, nothing is going to be a shock to the body. It's just about upping each thing. And they do say that first, say, one of your ultimate marathons, rather than just getting around it, is quite good if you're in really good 10k shape, say 12 weeks going in, so you've got that level of capacity as far as your leg speed, your endurance, and then everything can be sort of upped from there. But I think it's a mistake when people start from nothing and then they suddenly want to enter into all these different types of training, and everything is a shock to the body. So you keep everything at a certain level, and that doesn't mean you have to spend hours training, because if you're not doing the marathon training, it's not that time consuming just to keep everything in there, and then you're ready to top everything up as you enter your marathon plan, and it reduces the risk of injury when you're doing that.
Yeah, your first marathon of the year will probably not be as good as if you've done 3 in the year. So obviously you said earlier about maybe a training plan to get better through the year, but obviously just summarise that, so you're adapting the training sessions to the type of event that you're running at the time. I'll take one more question. Is there anybody else with a question?
Yeah, just a quick one on pace. Katrina touched on it earlier on, talking about running in heart rate zones. And sort of a lot of our members, it's a little bit too advanced for them. So, for example, if my race pace was 7-minute mile pace, what would I be looking at to do a slow running? How many minutes per mile slower than, say, 7 minutes?
That's the burning question that everybody wants to know. In every training manual or training book, everybody looks up. And if you look, there's a book in the library in Central Library in Belfast. It's from one of the top runner coaches, and the most creased page is that training zones percentage of your race pace. So that's a question, a very good question coaches like to know, is what training pace should you be running those easy runs, tempo runs and long runs of your race pace? Do coaches now think about that? Do you think about that question?
Answer, I don't know. I only know heart rate. You know,
so this person is a heart rate specialist, and a lot of people do that and do very well.
I feel like, to a certain extent, maybe you're running blind, you're only guessing. Mm-hmm. So that's why I said earlier on that, you know, if you want to do the thing properly, if you want to be professional about it, you need to find what your zone is. It's not reading it from a book or what somebody else is doing it. You need to find your own personal. That's my opinion, and it may be somebody else's.
So we have somebody who's working on heart rate zones. There are 2 good centres for heart rate zones. One in Amacloy, just outside Crossgar, where you can get that analysation of your heart rate zones done. And it's also a good one, Banbridge, for anybody who wants to know where they can go and get that done. Yeah. So if you're, can I just finish that one question? That's a very important question. So is anybody who does work in percentages Oh yeah, but just listen to this one. Is there anybody who does focus on percentages of race pace
I
for
sort
those?
of do my reps, try and do them at 20 seconds quicker than my race pace, or 20 to 15 seconds. I think that's what the rule is. I think in my longer runs, 90 seconds to 2 minutes slower than my race pace. So yeah,
There you go.
that's what I go on really. Anyway, that's what I've
The
read.
reason I ask is because a lot of guys, and I was speaking to Jenny yesterday, she struggles to run slowly, she says, and a lot of our guys, me included, if I've not done a run and I feel like I've left it all out on the road, have I done myself any good? And a lot of our guys feel the same. They struggle with the mentality of running slower because they don't feel like they're getting the benefit. So what is the science behind running slower to race faster?
Obviously, the different energy systems, the 3 energy systems that there are, obviously have to be built up. And
It is, yeah. It's that you'd be wanting to run around your lactate threshold rather than your lactate turn point, or below that for your easy runs. And it's about the fuel that you burn and about making sure you're ready for the fast sessions. Because if you're running hard day in, day out, your fast sessions aren't going to be as good quality. But I think Gemma said before 90 seconds to 2 minutes slower than her race pace. So if you're working on percentage, her race pace is faster than 7 minute miles. You're probably looking at 2 minutes at least slower, so 9 minute miles. But it's rough, isn't it? I mean, the heart rate is a more accurate way of. I mean, I don't know, Bashe, you might know. You're more of a mathematician. Somebody in the audience there might be able to tell you the exact percentage, but.
I think it's relative to your training as well. The more well trained you are, the closer you get to your race pace. The less well trained you are, the longer it takes to recover. And that comes back now to what Rena said, that take your race to recover.
Shall I pass him the red night?
don't start singing now, Asher.
No, that's later. I'm performing later. No, really what I'm saying there is that a fitter person can get closer to their race pace than a less fit person because they're well trained, so they'll recover quicker. But the key thing, and I think the key message that's come out of here is the thing that Katerina has said, is that you take your resting pulse the following morning because then you know how much you've recovered. And I think a lot of the questions that Andrew has asked today, they're tied around recovery, and all these elite athletes, that's what they're focusing on, is their ability to recover, whether it's enhancing their ability to recover through their diet, enhancing their ability to recover through doing easy runs, or enhancing the recovery by taking massages, etc. But ultimately, if you recovered, you can get quality sessions and you can progress. Probably the thing we haven't hit on that I think maybe this gentleman might have touched on is the physiological makeup of the athlete. And some people will crash really quickly because they're not well trained, or they might be more of a fast twitch creature. So if I went out for an easy run with Usain Bolt, at a nice easy 6 minute miles, he might have crashed before we get to a mile because his physiology is such that when he recruits his muscles, he recruits them at a much higher percentage than endurance runners. Endurance runners only recruit 35% of their muscular ability, whereas sprinters, they'll recruit closer to 75% of their muscular ability. So every step they take, they're working so much harder than an endurance runner. I'm going to stop now because I could go on forever.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Asher. Just one more question, just yet.
No, it's not a question, it's just adding to that particular point. Some of the coaches now have the equipment to do the lactate thresholds as they train.
That's right, yeah.
Some coaches have the equipment. Different athletes, they might run 4 minutes, then they do the blood test, then they do another 4 minutes, then they do the blood test. They have the equipment to decide the track, they just put the finger. And that's feeding into whether athletes are recovering or not. So that's a sort of variant of the heart rate, but getting a true feel from analysing the blood where athletes are. I know there's a number of coaches doing that now, and more clubs are starting to get into it with their serious athletes. They've determined what is 3 minutes, 4 minutes they should run, then they go to the side of the track and the blood test, then they have the second recovery, they do another number of them. And from that, they're getting more scientific in terms of, because I know of one top class athlete they established actually who wasn't recovering from the training and had to use it back. But they are learning it. But that's the other variant that happens. That's
something we're using all the time now. It's very interesting for athletes at our level. They are using that lactic testing. Something I have moved into myself in the last year. It's something very good to learn. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance today, this first session, and also a little bit of round of applause for our panel today.